And then once we're done with that, which is not going to be quite as long today, then we're going to do a couple of questions and answers that you have submitted to me, and that I'm going to do my best to answer as carefully and as thoughtfully as I can. And then after that, we're going to give you a song recommendation. And then after that, we're going to give you a couple of final pieces of information heading towards the weekend. So let's dive right back into Hebrews chapter 12, shall we? I've got my passage open. If you don't have the scripture open, just let me read this for you. Hebrews 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. What I've been trying to communicate is that if we want to finish the race that God has set in front of us, then we're going to have to keep our eyes focused on Jesus throughout the process. That's pretty much the only way it's going to happen. We got to lay aside the unnecessary weights. We got to leave sin to one side, and then we have to run the race with perseverance while we're looking at Jesus. This is his race. We're running for him, and we're running to him. He's the one waiting for us at the finish line. And so we look unto him and focus on him. That's our job. That's our goal. That's the only way we're going to get there, is if the founder and the perfecter or the finisher of our faith is the one that we're focusing on from start through the middle all the way to the end. Yesterday we started to talk about what does that look like? How, in practical terms, can I look unto Jesus or fix my eyes or focus on Jesus? And I suggested to you that the very best way you can do that is to watch the way Jesus ran his race in Scripture. And I talked about following the recipe that Jesus left behind for us. The recipe, the step-by-step instructions. Jesus lived a human life on earth where his race was a marathon and his goal was to please his Father. He had a finish line and he had a lot of difficulties along the way, and he ran his race with endurance. So if you want to know how to do it, watch the way he did it and then start to imitate him. Read the Gospels. Spend a lot of time in the Gospels. When you see Jesus reaching out to a group of people, consider how you could do the same thing. If you see Jesus calling out hypocrisy, consider, how could I do the same thing? Ask yourself the question, how can I be like Jesus was? How can I act as Jesus acted? How can I do what Jesus did? How can I avoid what Jesus avoided? And the more you imitate him, the more strength you'll get for the journey, and the more you'll find his Spirit empowering you to run the race just as he did. He left us a template to follow. He left us a recipe that if we go step by step, we will get to the end where we need to be, where he wants us to be. Today I want to take another look at that same idea. I want to give you another suggestion of a very practical how to look to Jesus, focus on Jesus in the middle of our crazy world today. Okay? So you remember verse 2 of Hebrews chapter 12 says this, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, we talked about that, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. That verse gives us a clue as to how Jesus was able to run his race with perseverance. Did you catch it? There's actually a trick there. A trick that he used to help him endure the difficulties that he endured. Think about Jesus' race. A lot of times we think, oh, Jesus was God, so his race must have been easy. I'm telling you, there is nothing further from the truth. The race Jesus had to run is way more difficult than any race you're ever going to have to run. Why? Because there was a cross at the end of that race. Or not at the end, but near the end of that race. A painful suffering that could only be accomplished by one person. And the agony of the cross is incalculable. We have no way of measuring how much pain and suffering there is in enduring the wrath of God and the wrath of man on the cross. So he had to go through a lot more than the rest of us have had to go through. And the question is, how did he do that? How did he get through that? I mean, how did the cross, the experiences on the cross, not just discourage him and cause him to give up and lay down on the course? How could he keep running with endurance when he had to experience the cross? The text actually gives us a clue right there. Did you notice it? It says he endured the cross, and then it says, for the joy that was set before him. He endured the cross. Why? Because on the other side of the cross, there was something waiting for him, something that had been laid out for him, something that had been promised to him. And what had been promised to him was joy. Joy. And that joy eclipsed the suffering. Now, it didn't make it go away. I guarantee you, Jesus felt the pain. Jesus felt the suffering. Jesus felt the agony. We know that on the cross, he is experiencing things you and I are never going to have to experience that are just horrifying and awful and almost impossible to imagine. So it's not like his race canceled, like the joy canceled out the pain. That's not how it works. But the joy that was set before him allowed him to endure the pain. Jesus was looking at the prize the whole time he's going through the pain. Jesus didn't fix his eyes on the cross. He could have. I guarantee you his body was screaming for him to pay attention to the cross. I guarantee you his spirit was telling him to pay attention to the pain of a separation from God and the wrath of. I'm sure that all parts of him were telling him, focus on the pain. It's all you can see. It's all you can imagine. But he intentionally said, no, I'm not going to focus on the pain. I'm not going to focus on the cost. I'm not going to focus on this present suffering. I'm going to fix my eyes, Jesus said, on what was awaiting me after the pain is over. After the trial is completed. After the cross is an afterthought. After the suffering has finally finished. And what was it that was waiting for him on the other side, friends? It was joy. Joy. And that joy made the suffering endurable. The joy made the pain worthwhile. Because Jesus, even in the middle of his worst suffering, and again, suffering you and I will never have to experience, Jesus believed that pain and suffering and loss, and even death, do not get the final word in God's universe. What gets the final word in God's universe? Joy does. Love does. Victory. And so he knew that, and he knew that the race did not end at the cross. The race ended with joy. He wasn't running to pain. That wasn't what he was going towards. He was running his race through pain to get to the finish line where there was joy. And the joy he was looking forward to him, was worth running to. It's worth running to. Now you might ask yourself, what joy are we talking about? And I'll be honest with you, the text doesn't lay it out specifically here, although it does give us a hint at the end that I'll refer to in just a minute. But I think there's at least three things that Jesus looked forward to, the joy that was waiting for him on the other side of the pain, and it made going through the pain tolerable and endurable. And the first joy, and I think this is the most important one, is the joy of his Father's pleasure. The joy of his Father's pleasure. Do you know that Jesus didn't need any other motivation to go to the cross but that his Father had asked him to? We talk about the fact that when he was on the cross, we were on his mind. You may have heard that gospel song from the past. I suggest to you that we might have crossed his mind, but what was on his mind while he's hanging on the cross is, I want to be faithful to my Father. I want to please my Father. I want my Father's glory to just burst throughout this entire world. And if this is the only way for me to reveal the Father's glory, then I am all in. He wanted to know his Father was proud of him. He wanted to accomplish his dad's will so that his dad could look on his son with joy and delight. And I'm telling you, that prospect of looking into his Father's eyes and seeing joy, seeing pride, seeing satisfaction, seeing a well done, that moment was something Jesus was looking forward to. He was looking forward to the first moment after this pain when he would see his father, and his father would reveal to him his love and his pride and his joy in his son's obedience. I'm telling you, that alone was enough motivation for Jesus. He didn't need all of us to motivate him to go to the cross. He had his father, and pleasing his father was number one. So that was one joy, his father's pleasure. And he knew that if he was faithful, if he endured this, he'd get his father's pleasure on the other side of it. And so it was worth running for him. Second thing, I think it's the joy of our accomplished salvation. Jesus knew that his mission was central to the rescue of our cosmos, of our planet, of our world, of humanity. He knew that his death was the one thing that if you take his death out, God's victory over sin does not happen. The happy ending, I always talk about the Bible as a story, right? The happy ending we're going towards, that we're all sacrificing for, that we're all longing for because we know this world is not enough, that happy ending would never happen if he didn't endure the pain of the cross. If he didn't go through that stuff, if he didn't go through that suffering, the happy ending is canceled. It's over. It's done. So what joy did Jesus have on the other side of this suffering? Is knowing that he was faithful to help the story arrive at the happy ending. And yes, that involved our salvation. And I'm sure he thought of us while he's hanging on the cross and being reunited with humanity. But it's so much bigger than any one of us. The joy Jesus felt was that the story God was telling is going to eventually arrive at its destination. And that destination is a happy ending destination. Joy for the universe. So yeah, Jesus was happy. On the other side of this pain, he was going to accomplish our salvation and the restoration one day of the entire world, the entire universe. And if he was unfaithful, that would never happen. And then the third thing is the joy of his future exaltation for his faithfulness. And that's the part that's referred to here in verse 2. It says he endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Now that's exaltation. Jesus, who was lower than the angels for a while as a human here with us, has now been highly exalted to the very right hand of the throne of God. Now everybody in all of heaven looks at Jesus and they don't mistake him for some lowly carpenter. They don't mistake him for some crazy madman or some charlatan trying to fool and trick the people. When people in heaven and angels in heaven see Jesus on his Father's right hand, they know who he is. They know he's been vindicated forever as the risen and reigning Son of God. And one day, those of us on earth that are a little bit slow to figure that out, we're going to get caught up to speed. And we're going to see Jesus at the right hand of the throne of God, fully exalted, glorified forever. And we're going to see that because of his faithfulness, he is now being rewarded with being highly exalted above every name. That faithfulness, that exaltation because of his faithfulness was part of the joy Jesus was looking forward to. So he had the joy of his Father's pleasure, which that's private between him and the Father. He has the joy of knowing he brought about the rescue for the happy ending of God's story. And the third joy is his own personal exaltation because of his faithfulness. Those three things motivated him forward. So how does this work for us? Let me suggest to you, all three of those things you have to look forward to as well. Now, on a different plane, but it's the same sort of thing. Number one, you have the Father's pleasure to look forward to. You have his joy. You have that one-on-one conversation you're going to have with with God the Father one day, where he either says, "Well done, good and faithful servant," or he doesn't. And when you're suffering and going through it right now, on the other side of that suffering, it's good to know that your Father will be proud of you, that your Father will be filled with joy and rejoice because of you. Your Father will be pleased. You have that same joy waiting for you if you choose to endure and run your race. But the second one, how about helping God's story get closer to its continuation, get closer to its conclusion? You and I can also share in that joy. Now, we don't have anything as significant to do as what Jesus did. The cross was that central event. But we have this role of sharing that news with people and bringing people into the family and helping God's story march closer to the happy ending. We can do that. We have a part in that. And when we suffer, our sufferings are not in vain. Our sufferings move the story along towards the conclusion. So you have that joy to look forward to know that your pain and your suffering helped God's story get closer to the end. And there's joy in that, looking at that, hoping for that. That is part of what helps you to endure and run your race when you're carrying your own cross. And then the third thing is exaltation because of your faithfulness. We can share in that joy as well. The Bible promises that those who are faithful will be rewarded. They will be exalted by God one day for that faithfulness. It's okay to look ahead to the fact that one day you will be appreciated, you will be rewarded. Maybe it doesn't happen in this earth. Maybe you go unnoticed and unappreciated, but one day in eternity, you will be known, you will be recognized, and you will be exalted for your faithfulness. And that is a joy that can keep you running when you would much, much rather quit. Friends, that's how Jesus did it. Jesus kept going through the cross because he had joy to look forward to. He wasn't focused on the cross. He was focused on what came after. May we also be motivated by what's coming after the pain that we're going through right now, the life we're living right now. Because on the other side of that is joy, unspeakable and full of glory. And I'm telling you, the more we get consumed with the joy that is set before us on the other side of our pain, the more possible, the more endurable, the more tolerable our race will be. So that's what I wanted to suggest to you. That's another tip for how we can keep our eyes on Jesus as we run this race that's even filled with suffering and hard times. Okay, sound good? Beautiful. I'll come back to Hebrews 12 next week. Got a couple more things I want to throw at you, but that's where I wanted to leave it for today. All right, song recommendation. I have this really beautiful song that's like 5 or 6 years old. It's from the Passion Conference. If you've heard of the Passion Conference, it's like Chris Tomlin and a bunch of Louis Giglio and a bunch of guys that get a bunch of college-age students together. It's usually in January every year, and they just have like 3 or 4 days of preaching and worship and really, really cool thing I've never been to, but I've seen some of the concerts and some of the messages from. They produce music every year, brand new music that they unveil at that conference. And there was a song that came out about 5 years ago called Let It Be Jesus by Christy Nockels. Let It Be Jesus by Christy Nockels. And the basic idea of the song is that whatever's on my mind, let it be Jesus. Whoever I cry out to for help, let it be Jesus. Whenever I hear somebody say my name and praise, let it be back to Jesus. Everything needs to be centered around him. No matter what I'm going through, no matter what I've been through, no matter what I've experienced, I'm always filtering everything through the grid of Jesus in my life. I hope you like it. I'll post a link on our Facebook page sometime this afternoon or evening, and I really hope it's a blessing to you. Let It Be Jesus, Passion Band featuring Christy Nockels. I think you'll really like it. All right, couple Q&A questions. Some of them are going to be pretty easy and a little bit silly, and then there's going to be one that's a little bit more on the serious side. So the first silly question that I got, which I loved, was, what was your favorite kids' cartoon when you were growing up? And I had kind of a top 4 when I was in elementary school, and you may be surprised, you may not be, and then I'll tell you my top 4, and then I'll tell you which is my favorite. See if you guys can check off any of these boxes. Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo is right up there. I love Scooby-Doo. Transformers, which was the transforming robots. They were cars, and then they were a robot, and they would fight against the evil Decepticons. Trust me, that's all dorky stuff for you. You can ignore it. And then Thundercats was another one, and then He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Those are the 4 that I used to watch without fail. And the winner is Transformers was my absolute favorite. I loved the idea of 2 groups of robots duking it out on our planet for good versus evil, and loved me some Optimus Prime. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, you need to go talk to your kids or grandkids or somebody, because it's great. And all of the new ones that are coming out. The other part of the question was, how do cartoons from my era in the 80s compare to the cartoons that are today? I'll tell you this, the cartoons from my era were way more cheesy and unself-aware than the ones today. The ones today are funnier, the animation is better, they have a better sense of more of storytelling across episodes as opposed to like 22 minutes as a self-contained thing. But there's something just awesome and majestic about how cheesy and dumb and predictable and awful the storytelling was in the cartoons in my day. And because there's so many options today, I think that'll always be the golden age of cartoons was in the past when there weren't as many options. So I make my kids watch old versions of the cartoons that I loved. I just do that and afflict them with it, and they seem to like it, but I still think they like theirs better. So I really can't comment too much on the new ones because I'm not as familiar with them, but certainly cheesy back in the old days. Second question was a little bit more serious from the same person, was this. Did Jesus know that Judas would betray him when he chose him as a disciple? And if not, why didn't God tell him about that? So I did a little bit of research on this one. Now, some people want to cheat and give you a quick, easy answer. And the quick, easy answer is Jesus was God. God knows everything. Therefore, Jesus knew everything when he was on this planet for his 33 plus years that he got. There's only one problem with that. That's not what Scripture says. There's actually a verse in Matthew 24 that talks about the fact Jesus is talking about the coming of the Son of Man back to earth. And he says, the time and the day, nobody knows it. The angels don't know it. And then he says this, nor the Son, but only my Father who is in heaven. Which suggests to me that Jesus, during his earthly life here, did not have 100% access to all the knowledge that was his by right of being God. I think that's part of what it means that he became fully human, is that God shielded some of the knowledge from some of the things that he knew beforehand. And the Father chose to reveal to Jesus in his human life only the things that Jesus needed to know as a human to accomplish his mission. Now, that turns out to be a lot more than what the average person knows, and Jesus had a direct contact and a direct line with the Father. And if you read the book of John, at many different points it says, the Father has told me, the Father has shown me, the Father has done this. So what you get the sense of is that human Jesus, who is also, of course, 100% God, he has a different relationship with the Father during that 33 years, and he doesn't take advantage of his divine omniscience to know everything that can be known. And the Father reveals to him what it is that he needs to know to accomplish his mission. So the question is, and again, I know that's debatable, but we've talked about this many, many times in ABF, and we can hammer that out, and maybe this will provoke more questions for future Q&A, and that's fine. But let me just assume that that's good enough for now because our time is running out, and let me hit this last question. So, did the Father reveal to Jesus who was going to betray him, Judas, or not? You know, because one line of thinking is Jesus just picked 12 guys, and then he found out later that one of them was going to be a betrayer. The other option is that he picked the guy knowing he was going to betray him because that's the way it was supposed to be. So which is it? It's funny. If you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you don't have a good answer to this question. Because the first time Matthew talks about Jesus knowing, or Jesus talking about someone betraying him, is in the Last Supper. And we don't have any information for it in the first 26 chapters of Matthew. It's only at the Last Supper that Jesus starts to get upset and goes, one of you is going to betray me. It doesn't come up earlier. However, John writing, he was the last of the four to write his gospel. In John chapter 6, at the feeding of the 5,000, we get this really, really interesting insight into what Jesus knew and didn't know about who was going to betray him. John chapter 6, verse 64, he's talking to a large group of people following him, and he says this, there are some of you who do not believe. And then in parentheses it says, for Jesus knew from the beginning who those were who did not believe, and who it was who would betray him. Jesus knew from the beginning who would betray him. So what that inclines to me to believe is that he knew from the very beginning that Judas, when he picked him to be one of his 12 followers, closest followers, he knew that Judas from the beginning was going to betray him. And then verse 70, Jesus reinforces that. Jesus answered them, did I not choose you, the 12? And yet one of you is a devil. He spoke, verse 71, of Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, for he, one of the 12, was going to betray him. So very clearly, the answer to your question is that Jesus knew that Judas was going to betray him. Not because he was God and he knew everything, but because the Father had revealed it to Jesus from the very beginning of his ministry that he was going to end up choosing one of the 12 who was going to end up betraying him. The more interesting question, perhaps, is why in the world would God deliberately choose one person out of 12 to betray him? That's a tough one, and I'm not going to try to answer that one today. Okay, I told you I was going to tell you a funny story about Chile. So down in Chile, they have an outdoor basketball court. And this outdoor basketball court has no walls. It's just got a roof. And so the wind obviously can blow through there, which was always super fun when you're shooting like three-pointers. But anyway, and there was a chain link fence around it, the entire big court. And there's like two little entrances to get in. Well, when I was in elementary school and in junior high and high school, I just ran on through the door because it was always way above my head. After college, I went back to Santiago Christian Academy as a teacher. And my first day of school, we used to go out to the covered, we call it the covered cancha or the covered outdoor courts, and we would welcome our students and then bring them in for homeroom kind of a thing. Well, my first day of class, I was super excited. I wanted to go out and meet my students, and I was so fired up and so excited. I forgot about the fact that from the time I'd graduated high school until I'd finished college, I had grown about 4 inches. Okay? And as I'm running out to the cancha, out to the outdoor courts, I didn't notice that the top of the entrance had this little bar, because it never bothered me before. And as I run out for my very first day, all the students out there waiting for their first day of school, I clip my forehead on this bar and hit the ground like just a sack of potatoes, a load of bricks, and I cut my forehead. I just completely humiliated myself in front of all my students, and I think it was probably a sign of the 2 years of doom that I was about to experience as a teacher at Santiago Christian Academy. So if you ask me about embarrassing moments, that's definitely my top 2 or 3. So full of excitement that I didn't even pay attention, clocked myself on the forehead in front of everybody, and trust me, for 2 years, they never let me forget it. And probably, if you're watching this on video, probably will never let me forget it still. All right, let me wrap this up. We got some final updates. Don't forget our Samaritan's Purse project. We're collecting funds throughout the month of April to benefit Samaritan's Purse for their field hospital in New York City. You can go to our church website, click on the Give button, and you can give that way, or you can mail in a check. Just designate it to Samaritan's Purse. That'd be great. No daily update tomorrow or Saturday. I need to kind of gear up for Sunday. Sunday morning at 9:30 a.m., we have our Adult Bible Fellowship that's going to be live streamed, and we're also going to be using Zoom. So if you want to be able to speak and actually ask a question during class, I'll be able to see a little video of you as well, so I can like make eye contact with you while you're asking me your question. If you want to use this new app called Zoom to be a part of this, all you got to do is go to a link that's at the bottom. It's going to be on our Facebook page. You click on the link, it'll prompt you to download the app, and then you can jump into the conversation. It'll be a lot of fun. Dan is going to put that on Facebook probably tonight or tomorrow. And then the last thing, obviously 10:45 a.m., we have our morning service. We'll have music, and we'll have a message for you and some announcements. We're looking forward to seeing you on Sunday. Lord bless you. Bye-bye.